It's Dina Dahl and Lisa Graves here on Legal AF, and we are breaking down a new Supreme Court decision. This is from their shadow docket, which means it's not a case that was brought before them. There were no oral arguments. It was essentially whether or not a lower court stay stopping Trump from mass firing government employees could stand. The lower court had paused that, let's say, to say, we need to see whether or not this is legal or not. You can't just fire thousands, tens of thousands of employees, until we know whether or not you're doing it legally. Of course, Trump asked the Supreme Court to step in and reverse the lower court, which they have just done. The Supreme Court is now allowing Trump to go ahead and conduct his mass firings. We have even Judge Sotomayor issuing a public concurrence addressing the concerns that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has raised in her dissent. So let's get into it all. Lisa, I know we have been following this case on Legal AF. If you haven't free subscribed yet, please be sure to free subscribe. If you've been following us, you have been hearing this. This is he attempted these mass firings back in February. We're in July. There was this pause in the firings. Was this what you expected? And what is, from your take now, let's get into the legal issues involved here.
Well, on the one hand, I feel like I'm just expecting a bad decision regularly from the Supreme Court because it has shown over and over the willingness, that is, of this right-wing faction, this 6 Republican appointees, to rule in favor of Trump and overturn lower court decisions. This ruling is a little different because there was a Democratic, concurrence, or at least I should say, it's not purely a 6-3 decision. But this case really involves, again, these standards that are being applied by lower courts about whether to grant a stay in response to really dramatic moves by this administration. In this instance, as you point out, Dina, immediately after Trump was sworn in, along with the efforts of DOJ to basically just fire people arbitrarily, there was also this order to prepare for what they call reductions in force by federal agencies, basically make plans for how to reduce the size of these federal agencies. And that's what was stayed. And so in essence, in this case at the Supreme Court, there is a majority opinion without oral arguments, without the full briefing by the parties and other concerned people who might submit briefs on this issue. There's a ruling by the court under this shadow docket basically saying that in this instance, the Trump administration might prevail. And so the standards for a stay, which means, which usually is there's a substantial likelihood of success by the parties, in essence, the court is saying that they haven't met that burden, in part because, as the concurring opinion notes, the administration, the Trump administration, in essence, has said that these reductions in force are to be planned out in accordance with all applicable law. And so, in essence, the court is presuming that this administration will follow all applicable laws in conducting these reductions in force, even though the plaintiffs in this case basically put forward arguments about how Congress should be involved in these matters, how in essence, this is not this type of thing, laying off thousands and thousands of employees of the federal government is something that should be conducted unilaterally by the president. In the midst of this, the timing of this decision is also curious, you might say, because it comes as Congress has also passed Trump's extreme changes to the budget for agencies. And so in essence, the court is saying that Trump may be able to proceed with mass layoffs of people who are providing basic services to the American people. So in some ways, this decision was predictable in the sense of the way this Roberts court is helping Trump, enabling Trump. And then in other ways, it's a little bit less predictable because there is a concurrence, in part on the predicate that this administration will follow all applicable rules, which it's shown in other settings that it has little interest in following all applicable rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Justice Sotomayor, in her public concurrence, she made a point of saying that the trial court judge should see the plans. That basically the plans haven't yet been presented by Trump. And so the trial court judge could take a look at that plan and still say that Trump is exceeding his authority with the restructuring, the firing. And so, in some respects, she's almost saying that this day is too soon, that the trial court judge still needs to see the plan and perhaps then decide whether or not it is lawful or not. But Justice Ketanji Brown, well, and that point is a valid point, let's say,
Right,
right? I mean,
right.
I think lawyers and justices, there's always this sense of not trying to do as little as possible, right? Especially the Supreme Court is always trying to do as little as possible. They don't like to make a decision about any kind of a future event. So to her point of let's wait and see, like that makes sense in terms of like a legal philosophy. But Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in her dissent, I felt like wrote something that literally every single one of us, on Midas and Legal AF that are following this and concerned about our democracy could be writing this, because she's like, let's take off the pretense here. Like, we know what he's trying to do. He's not trying to come up with some sort of plan that is not exceeding his authority and remaking it. He's vocalized that. He's said that. Project 2025 has talked about that. Possibly one of these plans may be crafted in a way to seem legal, but we know what he's doing. And that's why it's not okay. That's why we should go ahead and do this day now. We don't need to wait any longer. And she says here, she says, let me go ahead and just quote, because her dissent is actually quite long. We don't have any quote majority opinion, which you don't have to have for a shadow docket. It really is just, do you grant the stay or not the grant the stay? And we did see a very short concurrence by Sotomayor, about a paragraph, and her dissent is a few pages. One of the things she says is, this is not the first time that a president has wanted to restructure the federal government. Right? Like, let's just talk about what's happening. This is what he wants to do. Quote, even the most cursory examination of history readily reveals that over the past century, presidents have worked with Congress rather than around it when seeking to significantly reorganize the agencies that comprise the executive branch. And that's not even the most kind of scathing part of her opinion, but I thought that was like, went down to the crux of it. We all know, let's just take a step back, live in reality, get away from legal philosophies. We know what he's trying to do, and he can't do it, right? We have a co-equal branch of government. Unfortunately, she was the lone dissent in this case. The Supreme Court may very well get this again. We'll see. I mean, I do think, to your point, with this new budget that they just passed, this probably does change the framework a little bit, because now we have some congressional buy-in. And if Congress has lowered the budget for those particular agencies, you would always have firings at that point. So this whole, not like this case is necessarily moot, but it does change the facts that the trial judge will have in front of it now, because you're going to have the government talk about congressional intent now, right, with the budget bill, and how that squares with what Trump wants to do in terms of reorganizing the agencies. But regardless, this might eventually get back up to the Supreme Court. In the meantime, let's also get down to the reality here. We're going to have tens of thousands of people getting fired, right? This is essentially what they have allowed it in the middle of already really an economic crisis. We're already talking about consumer sentiment going down. We're talking about our GDP shrinking, the value of the dollar going down. Jobs were a lot lower. The creation of jobs were a lot lower this last thing. And then on top of it, you're going to have firing of government employees as well.
Yes. I mean, I really appreciate your highlighting Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, because my heart is with her dissent, because we know what's going on. This isn't just an abstract question. We know what this administration has already done. We know, for example, that through the actions of DOGE, I think more than 70% of the operations of USAID were shut down unilaterally without congressional authorization. Now, that's a separate lawsuit, but it relates to what this administration is doing and how it's going about it. And already with the really extreme changes that the administration is trying to impose on these agencies, the actions of DOGE, the attacks on federal workers, the hostility of people like Russell Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, trying to, make federal workers hate their jobs. We've already seen mass resignations, people taking buyouts. So, for example, over the Department of Veterans Affairs, well over 10,000 people have already resigned from the agency under the buyouts that the administration offered separate from this proposed RIF. And the head of that agency, Trump's head person over there, has said they're expecting basically another 10,000 plus employees of the Veterans Affairs Administration to resign in the next few months, even without these RIFs. And so that the loss cumulatively that we're anticipating of more than 20,000, almost 30,000 employees of the Veterans Affairs Department alone, what that means is that veterans, the people who served in our military, who sacrificed in our military, are not going to have the access to services, to helplines, to other assistance that they basically put their lives on the line and earned. And that's just one agency. We're going to see these sorts of cuts. We're already seeing the effects of these buyouts of agencies in terms of both our international policy, for example, with USAID shutting down in numerous countries where scientists and others were relying on those funds for a basic health support for people around the world that we've made commitments to. It's shut down scientific experiments that were underway, where shutting down those experiments means you have to start over if there's any funding to continue to pursue measures to eradicate disease or have medicines that help protect us from disease, both in the US and abroad. So there are huge consequences for this. And as you point out, Dina, this is also in the context of Project 2025's agenda, which Russell Vought helped put forward, along with other key Trump allies that are now within the Trump administration. And that agenda was very express about saying that they wanted to fire thousands and thousands of federal employees in order to get loyalists, replace them with people who were loyal to Trump, loyal to this agenda that's hostile to having a federal government that works well and that provides the American people with the services, protections for consumers, protections for disease control, federal parks that people can visit and have the trash picked up, along with, guidance from rangers. Like, there are so many things the federal government does that help make our lives better. And this administration is at war with those civil servants. And so these proposed RIFs, this plan to fire people later this year, they may try to rationalize it with these new budget changes, but in fact, it's been their plan all along.
I know. And my father was one of those federal employees. He immigrated to this country and worked in the government his entire life in the public health sector. He worked for the Veterans Administration and different departments of health. And, he believed in what he was doing, and it was a good job to raise a family, and the fact that MAGA and Trump has made those employees the bad guy is just astounding to me. So hang in there. If you are a public servant, we need you, even if they can't appreciate you now. So if you have not free subscribed, be sure to do that. Follow us on Legal AF. Lisa and I will have more duets to come. We will each also give you hot takes on all the many legal developments that this Trump administration keeps sending out.
Thank you so much, Dina. Thank you, everyone.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.